So how do you keep from falling asleep in meditation? I'll give you some pointers from my own experience, and we'll answer some other questions in today's video coming right up. I'm Doug Smith of the Online Dharma Institute, that's onlinedharma.org. If you're new to this channel and interested in living a wiser and a kinder and a calmer life, consider subscribing to the channel, and click the bell down below if you want to receive notifications when I have new videos. And I want to also mention, for those of you who might be interested, that I have a new course that's just out over on the Online Dharma Institute. It's about the Buddha's teaching to lay people, about how we could live a lay life, a normal life, or having a job, having a family, making money, having normal pleasures, what the Buddha had to say about all that. And so if that interests you, check out onlinedharma.org. So over the past few weeks and months, I've had a number of questions that are a little bit too short for me to make an entire video on. So I thought I'd group them here today and try to answer some of these shorter questions. And by the way, if you have your own questions, please feel free to put them down below in the comment section on this video, or indeed on any of my videos, because I do love to respond to questions, or if there's something more to be said, to make a video about them. So the first question I'm going to deal with is by Lemon L, who asks for me to basically create a kind of a table of contents of the Nikayas, all of the early Buddhist texts. Now, I have an earlier video on this sort of subject, so I'll put a link to it up here on the screen, where I talk about the vast majority of the Buddhist texts that are out there, at least early Buddhist texts, and try to do pretty much that. But I thought I would give a short recap here, because it may not be necessary for all of you to have all that information, or at least so much information. So in general, in the early Buddhist texts, they come in three baskets, or Nikayas. And the three baskets are the Sutta, the Vinaya, and the Abhidhamma. So the Suttas are probably the most famous. They're the ones that you may have heard of if you've heard of any of this. They are basically descriptions of dialogues, of discussions that went on, at least purportedly, during the time that the Buddha was alive, and a little bit, very, very little bit, from after he passed away. And so these are they're basically like discussions, conversations, arguments at times. They are didactic. He's trying to teach people. The Buddha is usually the protagonist trying to teach somebody, but not always. It's usually the Buddha teaching a monastic, or it could be teaching a layperson or a group of people. It's also sometimes monastics that are involved. That is to say, it's just a monastic teaching another monastic, asking questions of each other, perhaps a monastic teaching a layperson. And these can be very interesting, because they give you a slice of life into what it might have been like to live back then, and what the Buddha himself might have been like. And so basically the information that we have about the Buddha comes from these kinds of texts. Now, the second basket, I should also say that the suttas come in various books. There are the longer suttas, there are the shorter, I should say the middle-length suttas. There are suttas organized by number, that is, the number of what was discussed. If it was the Four Noble Truths, that would be in the fourth, in the section of the fours, let's say, just out of, just an example. And there's another one, another collection that are based on sort of themes that are in the suttas. And there's another collection called the Khuddaka Nikaya, which is just sort of a miscellany of shorter texts in general, but it includes some older texts, some texts that were clearly written after the Buddha's lifetime. It's sort of a grab bag, that fifth Nikaya, the fifth Nikaya, the fifth basket of the suttas. And so this is the Sutta basket, and then we have the Vinaya basket, which the Vinaya is basically the teaching of the rules that were given to the monastics, purportedly during the Buddha's lifetime, and as well as containing the rules themselves, the Vinaya contains stories around these rules. So basically, why the rule was undertaken. So it's not just the rule itself, but there's a justification for the rule. And I think that's very important because oftentimes, otherwise, I think, we might see a rule that was given to monastics and wonder what the point of it is. And so they always give a story about why that rule was decided on. Now, the stories may be true, they may be apocryphal, they may be from a later period, sort of a just so story. We're not entirely clear about all of them. And my understanding of the state of the art now in academia, is that the Vinaya, while part of it clearly does date back to the Buddha's own lifetime, there's a good portion of the Vinaya that is probably after the Buddha's lifetime, that was written in the decades and centuries after he passed on. So it's understood to be somewhat later, as a sort of an entirety, somewhat later than the suttas as an entirety. Although again, you'll have some suttas that are later than others, some suttas that were clearly composed and written after the Buddha's lifetime, some entire books in the Khuddaka Nikaya which are pretty clearly significantly later than the Buddha's lifetime as well. But taken as a whole, the suttas are the earliest, the Vinaya are slightly later, and the last basket is the Abhidhamma. And the Abhidhamma are a group of considered to be very dry texts that are basically an attempt to organize and structure all of the Dharma, all of the Buddha's teaching in one clear but very dry kind of book, or several books. But in general, that was the attempt. It was just, you can imagine in, let's say, a century or 2 centuries after the Buddha's lifetime or more, people might have come to the Sangha wanting to learn about the Buddha's teaching, and what they were presented with was a bunch of suttas, that is a bunch of discourses on different topics. And listening to literally the equivalent of thousands of pages of discourse, it would have been given orally, of course, listening to all this, it might have been quite confusing. People would have had questions about, well, yes, that's very nice, the discourses, but please tell me what this particular word means, or please give me the rundown on how to understand this particular concept so that I can understand it better. And so the Abhidhamma is an attempt to sort of collate all that massive information into a digested form, if you like. As well, there were certain innovations that were undertaken in the Abhidhamma, things that really don't appear in the suttas, but were done in the Abhidhamma sort of to clarify, at least according to the redactors of the Abhidhamma, to clarify the Buddha's teaching. And in contemporary Theravada cultures, which Theravada being the school of Buddhism that looks to these early teachings most assiduously, most importantly, in Theravada cultures, generally Abhidhamma is considered the most important teaching because it's sort of like the crown over the Buddha's Dharma. So that, in a nutshell, would be the quickest table of contents I could give about the books that give you the Dharma in an early Buddhism. And again, it would really be the suttas that you would have to look to for the earliest teachings. The Vinaya, parts of them perhaps, the Abhidhamma are significantly later, decades, centuries later. So that's an introduction. You can look at this other video of mine if you're interested, and of course there's a lot of information on the web. And if you have other questions, please leave them down below. Now, another question from Ray Harmony and Mark Wallace has to do with my own practice. What kind of practice do I have? And I must say that my practice is, I consider, relatively modest. I don't consider myself any kind of a very, very deep practitioner. I do my best, basically, but my practice is, as far as dedicated practice goes, I wake up in the morning, early in the morning, and part of my practice I consider to be going out and doing exercise. So I go to the gym for half an hour, a little more than an hour, 5 days a week during the week. I consider that to be really an integral part of my own practice because I find that it energizes and relaxes. I mean, it's this kind of paradoxical feature of exercise that it both relaxes you and energizes you at the same time. And Because my own practice, and indeed my own work with the Dharma, is very sedentary, it's really necessary for me to have time to exercise. And I think any of you who are in a similar position, whether it's doing Dharma work or more likely doing other work that's very sedentary, that you consider it part of your practice, that you spend some time doing physical exercise, walking, running, whatever it might be, on a regular basis, because it's extremely healthy for you. Of course, we all know it's healthy for your body, but it's also healthy for your mind. And I think a lot of the problems that people have nowadays with inability to focus, even with depression, can be dealt with through exercise, because exercise really does give you more of a sense of accomplishment and happiness, really, because it really does give you, again, that kind of internal energy. So I consider exercise part of what is called PATIPATTI in the commentarial tradition. PATIPATTI means a practice. It means the actual practice. But the dedicated practice that we find in the Dharma, I also do. I do meditation. Generally, my meditation practice now is a half an hour a day. I have in the past, quite a while ago, done 45 minutes a day. To be perfectly honest, it is better to do more. I probably should be doing more. But half an hour is a good sort of, for me anyhow, a middle ground, because it's doing enough to make a difference. If you do it every day, I find if I do this every day, half an hour is a good middle way, but not taking up too much time from the rest of my day. And again, for yourself, I hope you'll take this into your own life and try to find some amount of meditation that you can do regularly. Generally, it's helpful to do it after exercise, because you'll feel more alive. But wherever you can fit it into the day is good. And then from that, I switch to what is called PARIYATTI, or study. We have this distinction in early Buddhism, or at least in the commentarial tradition to early Buddhism, of practice and study. Study of the Dharma. And for myself, the work that I do here on YouTube involves a lot of study, of research, of reading articles, reading the texts themselves, that is the suttas. We've already talked about the Vinaya and the ABHIDHAMMA. All of these things need to be read and studied over and over again. There's an enormous amount of material, even just in the suttas alone. And all the time I'm coming up with articles or discussions, either online or elsewhere, that reveal new suttas to me that either I haven't read yet, or just as likely I've read once or more times, but I've either forgotten them or haven't attended to a certain portion of them in the proper way. And so it's this reading that I think brings the material to life for me, as I hope that my YouTube videos can for you as well. Now also, as many of you will know, I've been working on these courses over on the Online Dharma Institute, and they require an enormous amount of study and research before I do them. Both study in the sense of studying, again, the suttas, but also studying a lot of secondary literature, that is to say, academic publications, because while the publications or books put out by practitioners, that is to say, contemporary, let's say, meditation teachers, are extremely useful to me in my practice, and I hope to you as well. Nevertheless, when we're getting back to questions about early Buddhism, which is really what interests me, you have to look at academic study of this material, because I would say virtually the entirety, with very, very few exceptions, the entirety of the contemporary meditation teachers are teaching a kind of a syncretic sort of Buddhism. That is, they're taking material from early Buddhism, from later Buddhism, from Mahayana, from Vajrayana, from Theravada, and sort of squeezing it all together, picking out what is useful to us perhaps today, or at least in their view would be useful to us to learn. And so what you have is a kind of a mishmash of different sorts of Buddhism, which again can be good practice, it can be perfectly fine, but if what you're interested in is learning what the Buddha actually might have taught, how early Buddhism might actually have been, then you need people who really have a deep understanding of the history, of the historical context, of the historical documents that were available in the day, and who can read them and digest them and put them forward to an academic audience where they will get peer review and other people will have an ability to comment and so on. It's a very different kind of study, and it's more similar to what I did when I was an undergraduate or a graduate student in philosophy. So that material also needs a lot of study on my part. So a great deal of my day is spent doing that kind of research if I'm trying to get a course together, trying to get ideas for YouTube videos, trying to look for new YouTube videos, also answering your questions, this thing I'm doing right now. When I prepare my YouTube videos, they always come with show notes. I have lots of notes in front of me that I go by. I have to write up a bunch of notes because otherwise I'll tend to forget things or not put things in that I wanted to put in. So that takes time, and all of this ends up taking quite a large chunk of time, and I consider it part of my practice because knowing what the Buddha said, understanding the Dharma is frankly part of practice. I also consider daily life to be part of my practice, trying to keep an eye on my own tendencies towards greed, towards anger or hatred, or ignorance, frankly. And while I have noticed, I think, a great difference if I go back in my own life 10 or 20, 30 years ago, I notice a great difference in the way that I think, at least, that I interact with people. And all the evidence that I have from the past is that I have learned a great deal. I'm spending much less time on things that are unimportant or that are detrimental to myself or, frankly, to others. And so I notice the changes by doing this kind of practice, both in a dedicated way, in a formal way, let's say on the cushion, but also out in the world, trying to figure out through meditation what parts of my life are less useful than others. For example, spending time arguing with people online, which is something that took up a great deal of my life, say 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago. Spending time doing that is the kind of thing that I really try to avoid doing nowadays, unless absolutely necessary, because I notice through long months and years of meditation that it took a toll, that I could notice it in the meditation even the next day, even several days after, and that it was not good, not really healthy for me. So that's the kind of thing where I try to bring the work into my life. But of course, one of the things that I notice, as perhaps some of you do as well, is, that I have a long way to go yet, that I'm not anywhere close to awakening, let's say. That anger does arise within me, hatred does arise within me at times, that greed does arise within me at times. There are things that I want to get that I can't get, and that rankles me and makes me frustrated at times, even though I don't really need these things. It's part of the practice. It's something that I think that's the sort of thing that we have to deal with on a day-to-day or even a moment-to-moment basis. It's something that we bring to the cushion with us and look at while we're in meditation. And finally, there's the issue of going on retreats. Now, retreats for me are something that I haven't done very much of. Again, it tends to take time away from study, which is what takes up the bulk of my time. And it's something that I really tell myself I should do more of and probably will do more of sometime in the future. At the moment, I'm trying to get this YouTube stuff going and keep it going and begin the coursework over on the Online Dharma Institute. But at some point in the future, several years perhaps down the road, I may think about doing retreats, because I think retreats are, if they are a possibility for you, they are very good. And I've done certainly many, many day-long retreats, short retreats like that, and they have been extremely useful to my practice. For those of you who've done longer retreats, say a week or 10 days or even longer, they can sometimes be life-changing in a modest way, because you have to be careful that, when you're on retreat, you're in a different kind of environment, and so when you come back into an ordinary environment, you will, to an extent, be leaving that behind. And there's always the question with a retreat that are you really bringing it into the rest of your life, Or are you thinking of it as a kind of a separate world that you're in? And insofar as it's a separate world that you're in, it may not be as useful to you because then you leave it behind when you leave. It's rather like doing deep meditation. It's good while you're there, but then you have to come back to the real world afterwards. Also, we have a local meditation group which I help to lead every once in a while when the teacher is the main teacher is away, and that can be an enjoyable experience. Although I don't enjoy public speaking, as I think I've mentioned before on this channel. I don't mind talking to you guys. Talking to a camera, which is what frankly I'm doing, is easy for me, but speaking in public is harder. So anyhow, that's my own practice. And finally, the last question from Gundel Whittlebaum is how to deal with sleepiness during meditation. And this is, I think, one of the most difficult, at least in my own experience, difficult parts of meditation, is dealing with sleepiness. Because it's the sort of thing that when it's upon you, it sort of gets in the way of your doing anything. It gets in the way of any kind of effort you make by basically taking away effort itself, by clouding the mind. And now in the early texts, there are given a number of different strategies for dealing with tiredness or sleepiness during meditation. I think I've talked about these in at least one prior video. But in a nutshell, there are things like pulling your earlobes, sort of to wake yourself up, or trying to visualize a bright light. I think that the assumption here is that you're doing this at night, and so you're tired because it's after dark or still dark in the morning. And so visualizing a bright light might help you. Other things are to stand up, do walking meditation instead of seated meditation. There are a number of these kinds of examples or recommendations in the early texts. But what I would say is that with the possible exception of walking meditation, I don't find the examples they give in early Buddhism to be very useful, at least in my practice. What I would say in general to avoid sleepiness, the first and I would say primary way to avoid sleepiness in meditation is to get plenty of sleep. And I think this is a problem that many of us have nowadays, where I think many of us live sleep-deprived lives, so that we get up either too early or go to bed too late, or both, because of our work schedule or other things that may take up time in our lives. And if that's you, then I think it's unfortunately going to be the case that you may most of the time be dealing with sleepiness during your seated meditation, because seated meditation it's a practice that's designed to calm you down. That's the point of it, to calm you down so that you can focus on the present moment, focus on your mind, focus on what's going on right now. But if you're already sleep deprived, then calming yourself down is just going to make you go to sleep. And there are, I think, good reasons to say that if that happens to you and you're sleep deprived, it may be better just for you to take a nap and deal with meditation at a later time, or perhaps in a very short segment after you've had your nap and are a little bit more awake, because there's no other way around that problem. It can also help to do meditation at a particular time of day where you're a little bit more awake. Perhaps, let's say, instead of doing it late at night when you may be sleepy, it may be helpful for you to do it in the morning, let's say after taking a shower. The shower will tend to wake you up, you'll be a little bit more alive. I myself, as I intimated just recently, just a few minutes ago, do meditation generally after I exercise. And after exercise, after a shower, I'm more awake, and I think you'll probably find the same. You tend to be more awake, a little bit more alive, you've got more energy, less chance of being sleepy, at least for a significant portion of meditation. So finding the right time of day, organizing meditation with other things that are useful, not meditating after you eat, that's another thing. It's better in general to meditate on an empty stomach rather than on a full stomach. An empty stomach, again, gives you a little bit more vitality, a little bit more energy. It may be an energy of hunger, but that's okay. You can practice with that. Whereas if you've just had a large meal, that will ordinarily tend to make you somewhat sleepy, a little bit lethargic. I personally find that the hardest time to meditate is after I've just eaten, let's say, lunch, not even to say dinner, for that very reason. So I think picking the right time of day and the right time in your life to do meditation can be a good way of avoiding the problem in general. When the problem's upon you, there are, again, things you can do, but they tend to be less successful in my opinion. A lot of what you can do is just practice with sleepiness when it arises, if you've done all the rest. It's just say to yourself, sleepiness has arisen, here it is. Investigate it insofar as you can. Be aware of it when it arises. That can be a good practice. So you, let's say, can be aware of it when you're driving, let's say. If you're aware of sleepiness when it's there, then it can help you perhaps in other parts of your life where it may be more important for you to know that you're being sleepy rather than being awake. So if you find this useful, check out my Patreon page. It can be very helpful to yourself for a practice of generosity and to help support the work that we're all doing together here on the channel. It's linked here down below. Give the video a thumbs up if you like this. Subscribe to the channel and recommend it if you think other people might be interested in the kind of material I'm presenting. So I hope we'll catch you on the next one of these videos, and meanwhile, all of you be well.